A very good morning to you all, ladies and gentlemen. So, as mentioned, my name is Andreas de Vries, and I'm here today to host this panel on sustainability and decarbonization. Now, myself, as was mentioned, I lead the downstream strategy and sustainability function within Aramco. Now, I can probably talk to you for hours about why exactly in Aramco we chose to put strategy and sustainability together. And I think, as you can imagine, that maybe has to do something with the fact that we see sustainability as a subject that should be at the core of strategic thinking. So not an afterthought or something that you add on, but really at the essence of business strategy. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure that our distinguished panel members today can probably speak about the topics with hands-on experience. So in other words, in a much more interesting and fascinating manner than I can. So let me start by introducing our panel members to you in a little bit more detail. First, to my left is Dr. Hassan Karam, who is the Vice President of Plant Operations, Ruwais Refinery, within Antwerp Refinery. Dr. Hassan has over 2 days of, I can say, distinguished career, Dr. Hassan, because I understand that Dr. Hassan played a leading role in helping Ruwais achieve 80 million continuous work hours without LTIs, which I think is really an impressive achievement, and also in a leading role in the waste heat recovery program that is currently underway at the refinery, correct? Next to Dr. Hassan is Fadi Al-Shihabi, who is the ESG lead for KPMG here in the Middle East. Fadi also a distinguished member of the panel. Thank you so much for being here today. Fadi also has over 20 years of experience, but not just in advisory, but again also in hands-on experience in oil and gas and in downstream. Correct, Fadi? So quite confident that Fadi too will have some really interesting experiences and perspectives on the subject. And last but not least, we have a senior fellow from the Japan Cooperation Center for Petroleum and Sustainable Energy, Mr. Tetsuo Arii. Mr. Tetsuo not only leads the program at the JCCP that is designed around strategy for managers from national and Japanese companies, but he's also an expert in Japanese policies around sustainability, decarbonization, and how Japanese companies are operating in this area. So today we're going to try to bring all of these perspectives together and hopefully have a really interesting conversation with you today. Now, to get started, I guess like we discussed, gentlemen, the intention of today was to maybe go beyond the headlines of sustainability and decarbonization. Everybody here knows the subjects and we all know those headlines. But what we wanted to explore with you together today is a little bit more, firstly, about what companies are doing on the ground in these subjects. What's happening really? And secondly, what is likely to be the future of these subjects, sustainability and decarbonization? So if we start with what's happening on the ground, maybe Dr. Hassan, would you mind sharing some of your experience from Ruwais Refinery, from Antwerp Refinery? What does your journey in sustainability and decarbonization look like? And what are you doing on the ground today?
Okay. Thank you for your question and good morning to everyone. Let us start from the beginning that we are living in a nation where we are having a very extreme heat and very expensive sort of the waters. So my country as a UAE, they have a long view in this era toward the climate change. And ADNOC Refining, they've started the journey of doing the sort of the minimizing the emissions and maximizing the efficiency. Looking to the holistic view, we as a refining, we should start identifying all the emission associated in our refinery. However, in cost effectiveness and environment regulation. And we as an ADNOC Refining, we will continue work to serve the nation with all type of the transportation fuels. In the previous year, where the COP27, the UAE has announced that by 2050, we are going to have the net zero footprints. And based on that, ADNOC Refining, they've started the journey to support this initiative. And the good things that we've started, and some of them that are now in the commercial business and commissioning stage, the waste heat recovery. So imagine that with the same emissions and with the same burning of the fuel gas, you can produce around 200 megawatt of power. At the same time, we commission a new SRU, sulfur recovery units, where we can extract 99.9 of the H2S from the environment and replacing the old design sort of the technology. At the same time, in ADNOC Refining, we start a good initiative toward the low carbon aviation fuel and sustainable air fuels. And also we have some initiative to capture as much as we can the refinery of gas. All these things that in our agenda, it gives us a clear indication that the business is dynamic. If you fail to plan, the plan will fail. So you should be ready to produce a sustainable, because you don't know the future. Maybe the future will come in with, as mentioned by one of my colleagues yesterday in one of the technical sessions, that you might have the new regulation and tax in your product. So you should be agile and you should be resilient in order to cope with the new requirement. And also, as mentioned yesterday by ADNOC Refining CEO, Mr. Abdel Atiyah, that as per the US sort of the information energies, that there will be an increase in the demand of the energy resources by 47% in the next 30 years, which is equivalent to around 36 of your fuel product. That gives us indication that there will be some sort of the increase in the growth toward the energy resources. At the same time, you should be embedded with the new sustainable and environment product.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So if I understand correctly, so while you look at decarbonization and making sure you, as part of that, you make maximum use of every molecule in the refinery. Exactly. At the same time, you're also thinking ahead about what future energy solutions could be, because you mentioned, for example, sustainable aviation fuels. Exactly. So that's fascinating.
Thank you.
Now, on your point that we need to be agile and we need to look ahead, because we don't know exactly what the future will look like, how regulations can change, how customer preferences can change. So maybe with that point, let me move over to Mr. Fadi. Mr. Fadi, to hear your perspective on what's happening in the ESG world today, not just here in the GCC or in the Middle East, but also more broadly, United States, Europe, and how you think that could be driving the agenda for sustainability and decarbonization going forward. Your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, and good morning, everyone. In fact, when we look at sustainability, ESG, decarbonization, we can see that these topics are not very new to the globe, but there is like huge pressure coming now towards these topics. Why? Because we have more understanding to the climate change crisis. In fact, it's a crisis. We can see the impact of the climate change everywhere. So regulators started to put more pressure on stakeholders, on manufacturing facilities, on everyone. So we can see during the last few years a lot of new standards, frameworks related to the ESG or climate risk or biodiversity, circular economy have been developed to standardize the way of reporting the ESG or decarbonization performance across different sectors. For example, we have global standards like the GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, we have the TCFD, we have CDP and others. Also, the United Nations took a great role here and they developed the Sustainable Development Goals. One of these areas is energy and climate change. This is on a global level, and we see Europe is a bit advanced in this area where they advanced the standards and imposed the reporting across all companies in Europe and beyond. So they developed which is called Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which will take into place next year, which will impose companies in Europe to report their activities across not only the high-level related topics, but that will go beyond the topics that we used to hear about, like waste management or circularity, environment, etc. No, there will be more than the typical indicators or typical topics that we used to hear about that. So that will increase, or the companies which should report their activities from around 11,000 to 50,000 companies. And this is not only on European companies, this is outside EU. We will have also hit here in the region because we import and export goods with Europe. So companies which have more than $150 million turnover, they have to report this. Either if you only have one JV in Europe, you have to do the reporting. So the region here will be part of this new framework or new standards. Here in the region, we have to say that we can see a great development and improvement in the ESG area. And sometimes during my business, I go to clients where they say that, oh yeah, we are still behind the globe in this. And I'm totally against that. We can see here in the region great initiatives, great work happening, not only on project spaces, but also from regulations. We can see Saudi stock market Tadawul, they published the guidelines to support listed companies to report their activities in ESG domain and decarbonization. We also have Ministry of Commerce in Saudi. In UAE, they also made that mandatory to all listed companies in UAE. So we have great momentum here in the region. We also see oil and gas operators in the upstream, midstream, and downstream. They are taking this very serious. We can see Saudi Aramco reported last year their upstream carbon intensity around 10.69 kilogram per barrel oil equivalent. So this is another challenge. We can see Saudi Green Initiative, for example, a great contributor to the climate change. We can see in UAE also the refineries, the upstream, they are taking care. Qatar Energy as well. We can see also companies changed their names and branding. For example, we used to see Qatar Petroleum, now it's Qatar Energy, where they are diversifying their portfolio to include more renewable energy. We can see Total, for example, another example of companies change the strategy to adopt the new regulations and the new requirements and new demand. So at the end of the day, when it comes to regulations, this is it's coming very fast towards us, and those who will start to be ready to the next step will have the resilience to meet the new requirements and to maintain their market share. And on top of this, to protect the planet, all these activities, regardless, is it net zero carbon, decarbonization, all these things, is just to sustain what we have now to the next generations and make sure that they will enjoy the planet and the wealth that we have now for them and beyond. So this is in brief, and hope it is useful.
If I summarize, or if I understand correctly what you're saying, so basically you're saying that even when, for example, in the example you gave, even when the Europeans adopt regulations around ESG, that can affect us as operators here in the GCC if we have a commercial relationship with those parts of the world, correct? But it's really interesting also to hear your examples that maybe people sometimes clearly incorrectly believe that we are behind the curve here in the region when it comes to sustainability, decarbonization, ESG. But I think all of your examples clearly spell out that that's really not the case. This is at regulator and at company level part and parcel of how we do the business today. Yeah? But one point I want to delve in a little bit further, again, the point about things are changing and are likely to continue to change. And with that in mind, I wanted to turn to Ari-san to talk a little bit more about Japan. Because Japan, obviously, as we all know, is one of the major customers of GCC energy in general. But Japan is also one of those leading nations in the world. So it's a really good example to look at and to study, to develop an understanding of how things could develop in the future, in particular as to what our customers will be expecting from us. So with that, Ari-san, could you share some insight into Japanese government policy and maybe the responses of major corporations in Japan on the subject?
Thank you for introduction. Actually, first thing I want to note is that, decarbonization, is it the right word or not? You see, every day we eat food, and every day we emit CO2. And the carbon is a precious material for human beings. That's the first note I want to mention. Then I introduce Japanese policy and industry practice. Okay. So this is the energy transition of Japanese policy. Actually, 2030, we mitigate GHG emission by 46%. So this is our target, at the 2030. But behind these figures, the concept is clear. The first, we have a two-stage policy. The first one is electrification of energy. And the second stage is renewable power generation. So we have to distinguish those two policy, because this is quite different approaches. And actually, why I said decarbonization is not the right word, or sometimes misleading, because we set the policy. The title is Green Growth Strategy, not decarbonization. Okay? Because this transitional era, we have opportunity to lead the industry. So we have to invest in research and development, new technology, innovation. For what? For utilization of hydrocarbon. This is our target. So CO2 is just a waste of hydrocarbon. We have to utilize, add value to hydrocarbon. It's quite, identical to Saudi Aramco or ADNOC policy. Actually, for that purpose, we need technology innovation. So we select 14 category of industry, which tackle with the, decarbonization or adding value to the hydrocarbon. So this is the picture of Japanese policy. So we segregate two phases. The first phase, we have to align with the, climate issues. So the first target is, primary target is mitigation of carbon emission. But second phase, we are focusing on utilization or adding value to hydrocarbon. So this is two-stage approaches. We need some time, so we have to invest in those research and development. That's the picture of Japanese industry and policy. Yes.
Very much for that. So that's a beautiful addition to the conversation so far. Aziz-san is bringing in the concept of technology, research and development to move this agenda forward, correct? So I think from my perspective at least, this brief conversation was already very interesting to understand what's happening on the ground, how regulations are changing around the world, and in particular how Japan is seeing research, development, technology as really the way forward for sustainability, decarbonization, a greener future. With that, I think now is an appropriate time for me to open it to the floor and see what kind of questions you might have for our panel members today. Let's see, if you want to ask something, maybe you can raise a hand, and then if I spot you, I'll give you the opportunity. Any questions for the panel members today? Nothing so far. Okay, well then let me step in, because I do have a few questions of myself. Oh, we have one. I'll hold my questions then. Please go first. Do you need to wait for a microphone?
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much. Just a question to our colleague, Mr. Titsu. The question regarding the non-usage of hydrogen in the technology part. Can you shed light? Because I thought that Japan is very much interested in hydrogen importation, green hydrogen. And can you relate that to what you have written there and, from strategy point of view? Thank you very much.
Please, Mr.
Yeah, thank you for your question. That's a good point. We are very, very keen to, import green or blue hydrogen from your countries. But behind the scene, the real fact is we cannot, generate or create renewable energy by ourselves. So currently, we are quite dependent on hydrocarbon from your countries, almost 80%. But in future, still, we need sufficient renewable energy, which we cannot provide. So we actually shortage position for renewable energy, even the renewable energy. So that, that's the area we can cooperate with your countries. How, we can import renewable, energy source from your countries. That's the point.
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for the answer. I see another question over there. Please, sir, go ahead.
Discussion, Dieter Tuppinger, OQ. I have a question to the Japanese colleague. How much is the share of nuclear industry in this journey to decarbonization?
That's a great question indeed, Arisa, because I'm sure you have the answer, but we all know that there's lots of debate in Japan about the future of nuclear. So your thoughts on that subject?
First of all, I have to appreciate, all your countries, because in 2011, at the Fukushima incident, you were kindly provide crude oil and gas for the region. Then we can recover the economy of the region. But, microscopically, I know that at the, destructive, regions, the first thing we have to do is provide gasoline to recover the region. Many lifeline has been disrupted, but first point we can recover is gasoline service station. Then we can start the reconstruction of the economy. So security is one of the key elements, so that, this is a lifeline, the GCC and Japanese, society. The hydrocarbon is a lifeline for us. That's the first thing I want to note. And return to the question of nuclear. Now, social perception is quite negative in Japan. So even though we have 20, some nuclear power plant, but we just operate 3 or 4 currently. But as I said, that we don't have sufficient renewable energy, even 2030 or 2050. So we said in 2030, the nuclear should account for 20% of power generation sources. So that's the figure. Okay.
I think it's a very good question also from the guy. In adduct refining, for example, you can utilize the synchronize and collaboration with the nucleus. For example, we as an adduct refining, we are having the 3rd largest refinery in the world with the 1 million barrel per day. And guess what? We have an excellent synchronization of the power from the nucleus with the 300 megawatts. That gives us a clear indication that the nuclear is not far away from the business of refining. There will be a collaboration. And I think this is maybe the new era of collaboration between the nuclears and the refining business.
Helping you to basically manage your scope 2 emissions, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah?
Exactly.
Okay, so you can see that developing into something that gets applied more broadly in the industry, maybe even more globally than rather in your case.
Yes.
Okay, that is fascinating. Okay. Well, so please, think about any other questions that you might want to ask the panel members. I know I have one, so maybe while you think, allow me to ask my question. I'll get back to you in a second. Because the subject of technology has come up. And basically, I wanted to ask Mr. Fadi, but also Mr. Hassan, maybe Mr. Hassan first, because you mentioned the waste heat recovery, right? So basically, getting more out of molecules that you already use, which is basically free additions, no emissions associated with whatever you do. Are you in a position to talk to us a little bit more about what this waste heat recovery program is really about at your refinery?
Good question. Let me start by saying that we have our existing system where the normal gas turbine will be fired with the natural gas, and you can have the generator can produce certain amount of power. And that hot flue gas, which will go outside from the chimney, we came up with the solution that we can utilize the hot flue, and utilize it in the steam turbine, where you can generate the power to a tune of 230 megawatts. And that's also give us indication that you efficientize your system, the cogeneration system, from the 37%, imagine, to almost 60%. So that's the secret of the waste heat recovery. As you mentioned rightly, that you will generate more with less. So you will have a more production with less emissions and less natural gas burning.
Imagine, and I'm sure that energy efficiency is top of everybody's agenda who is looking at decarbonization. Thank you so much, Dr. Hassan. Fadi, so beyond energy efficiency, when it comes to technology, maybe research and development, what are your views? Do you think that more R&D is required? Which areas? Or do we have what we need to deliver upon sustainability and decarbonization? What's your perspective?
Yeah, sure. If you allow me to take one step back and discuss why people, think that oil and gas industry is very harmful industry, because they used to see flares all around. They used, to consider the oil and gas industry as the biggest pollutant. But I think this was, okay if we go back to the 70s of the last century. But with the development, we can see the yields coming from the downstream of each barrel of oil has been significantly improved through the technologies, either the FCC, Unipon, hydrocrackers, etc., etc. So when we look at the energy intensity or carbon intensity per barrel oil, we can see a significant development and improvement in the numbers. And honestly, we should keep complaining, on the oil and gas industry, especially with the new technologies. Also now we have the carbon capture, use, and storage. This is a new technology that will significantly reduce the carbon intensity. We can see the blue hydrogen and blue ammonia concept. We can see this in reality now. We have shipments, from UAE to Germany, from Saudi to Japan. So it is reality. We are not just talking about R&D. We started seeing, solutions on the ground. Also, we can see a lot of efforts in catalyst engineering, where they are really supporting oil and gas producers and business to increase the efficiency and the yield. I believe when we say that we would like to go to the net zero carbon, this is something very ambitious. And that's why we put that in 2050 and 2060 in some countries, because technologies are not there now. But we have the concept. We have to start. And we already started with this concept. So what we are trying now to do, to find the way, to find the path of, decarbonization or the net zero. And it will come when we keep investing in R&D, because when 15 years ago, when we were talking about solar energy photovoltaics, it was very expensive. It was not financially feasible. No one was interested. Nowadays, we can see huge businesses are there. For example, here in the region, we have Aquapower, we have Masdar. They are working heavily on producing electricity from renewable sources. So there is nothing impossible. It is just a matter of keep investing in R&D, as well as, keep working on the plan. One last thing is net zero carbon. If we consider scope 1, 2, and 3, it might happen, but I don't think now we are still ready for that. So the transition from, what we have now to the low carbon economy or low carbon fuel, it is in the process, but it's not straightforward as we think. So we should not keep blaming ourselves that yes, but we are not there, but we are approaching to in the right path towards the right objective, the right goal. Thank you.
Sure. So I remember there was one hand at the back over there. Yeah, if we can give the person another one. Yeah, I saw you. So we'll do that one first, and we're going to come back to you. Not to worry. Go ahead, sir.
Good morning. I got two questions. What's the thoughts about the marine industry impacting sustainability and decarbonization? And the second question, with regards to technology enhancement, how is that going to balance with regards to employment perspective? Because with technology, manpower gets reduced, etc., etc.
To clarify, yeah? So on your first question about marine, do you mean marine as a customer for the downstream business?
I'm talking about the ship industry playing a role with regards to decarbonization, etc.
Okay, okay.
I can answer if you allow me, please. So, by the way, it's great questions. I don't like to make a propaganda for ADNOC refining, but this is the reality. 5 years back, we've commissioned the first, you can say that, slurry agitators in the world. We are the only unique sort of the providers or processing of the slurry agitators. And based on that, we are producing something called a calcium coke and carbon blacks. So, number one, we are producing the low sulfur slurries, which help the marine, sort of the IMO regulations. And number two, we are targeting to produce a zero sort of the production of the fuel oil. That's contribute in terms of the IMO and the marine sort of the regulation.
That's fascinating. And I think, regarding your second question, maybe I want to share something from my perspective, yeah, because I'm from the Netherlands originally. I came to the Gulf about 10 years ago. And so the point here is that once you start going into new technologies, you require new skill sets. What does it require for the human resources, for the employees? And in that regard, something that I really noticed and that really for me stood out was the amount of time and effort that the national oil companies here in the region spent on training and developing their employees. So I totally agree with the perspective that as we work on technology to provide new solutions to decarbonize for a more sustainable future, that requires a reskilling or an upskilling of the employees. But at least from my perspective, I really see that happening across the region. And maybe Mr. Fadi, since you interact with lots of companies, is this one of the subjects that you interact on with your companies?
Yes, thank you for that question. And this is like a very relevant question because when we talk about decarbonization, it's one of the ESG elements. We still have the social element, which is like, employment, job opportunities, etc. What we have noticed during the last maybe 5 years in particular, that the labor market has changed, and now we need new skills to the new joiners in particular, to the new graduates. It is not like 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Those should be like more in the digital area. Those should be like, and I think this is what is happening now, because let's say those who are like 40 years and older, I think we started using cell phones when we were 20 years or 22 years old. And now we can see kids with 3, 4, 5 years old. They already have either tablets, cell phone, etc. So I think they will get more ready to the new challenges than us from like, mindset. And then when we offer them these new technologies, they will be like more available and more ready to adopt and absorb these technology challenges. I think it is not reducing the number of job opportunities, but it's changing the requirements. But at the end of the day, that will create more job opportunities, because we just were talking about R&D, which is like one of the areas, digital, artificial intelligence, etc. Those topics have not come with zero efforts. People put efforts to come with these topics and solutions, and it's evolving more and more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vaart. Now there was one more question over here. Yes, gentlemen. Yes, sir. Please go ahead. If somebody can give you a microphone.
Yeah. Good morning to all. My question is on low-grade heat recovery. I am referring to temperature of around less than 200 degrees centigrade, because such kind of heat source is abundant in refinery. What are the developments happening in that technology, low-grade heat recovery, like ORC, organic Rankine cycle, or nanofluids to increase the heat transfer coefficients? Because it appears that this technology might be cost-effective rather than capturing the carbon.
We don't have real technologists on the stage, so we might not have the answer to this very specific and detailed question. But I want to try, Dr. Hassan, is this something that you're familiar with, or maybe Ari-Isan?
Okay, basically heat pump technology would be applicable. Those low level of energy resources. Actually, in Japan, for example, geothermal. Sometimes we have quite low, energy sources, but we can utilize geothermal by utilizing those heat pumps. So this is one way to utilize that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, then maybe here in the middle there was a question.
Good morning, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you. I have a question building on the technology discussion. As a downstream strategist, I'm really interested. Are we still looking at decarbonization as solely a regulatory compliance exercise? Or can we already start talking about seeing some future commercial opportunities coming down the road in the future for us? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. That's a really good question. And what comes to my mind, at least, is, for example, is the subject of hydrogen, right? Where hydrogen has been around for a long time, lots of customers, and decarbonizing that, either maybe in today's world, making it blue, is creating a new market, new product, new customers. Can you imagine, maybe, Dr. Hassan, something similar developing from a refinery perspective?
Actually, as I mentioned in the beginning, that we as Nadug Refining looking ahead for the future, and as you mentioned rightly, that there will be some sort of the new products will be in the market, and based on that, you will have a new regulation on it. And one of the things that, for example, in Nadug Refining, we are working it for the LCAP and the SAF, the aviation fuels, where we might have this in the future, which have an intensive commercial, and also it harness the concept of the decarbonization and emissions. So yes, you are right that the refining should target how to embed it in the new product portfolios and the new product market in order to have the win-win situation. You will enhance your commercial mindsets toward the new product portfolio. At the same time, you can also contribute in a less emission and environmentally friendly.
No, just I know that yesterday there was a presentation on LCAF here at the GDA, but just to make sure. So LCAF is basically the conventional jet fuel, but with a lower carbon intensity. Exactly. Because of your decarbonization exercise. Exactly. And SAF is jet fuel, but from a different source than crude oil.
Exactly. Right? We can say that from the heating oils or the cooking oils, which is maximum maybe a 5% of this blending you can use it in co-processing. However, the LCAP, as you mentioned right, is that anything that intensity less than 80, we can call it an LCAP.
At Ruiz, you're working on both of these things at the same time.
Colleagues in the technicals, they are working on that with a collaboration with some of the refineries in the Europe.
I think this seems to be a subject that our panel members are quite excited about. So let me go around. So Fadi, did you want to say something on the subject as well?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, regarding to the SAF, we can see this is like, not commercialized 100%, but from technical point of view, it's acceptable. We saw one flight for Emirates last week with one engine 100% on SAF. So this is something really good to see that it is like from technical point of view, it has been approved. Also, there is like, which is called responsible flight. It's one of British Airways flights from the north of the UK to the south. It happened last year. So the concept is there, and we can see that from like technical point of view is very doable. Now it's how to manage the supply and demand and how to make this like more profitable. Because at the end of the day, we are not looking at decarbonization, sustainability, all these things as extra cost. We are looking to enhance the operations and increase organizations' resilience. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Actually, I would like to raise one point that, the research and development or any application of abatement, you should judge whether this could be only compliance measures or future direction of your business. That is a key distinction. And as I said, if you look into the value of hydrocarbon, if you can enhance the value of the hydrocarbon, this is the future direction. But just abatement or just a sequestration is a temporal, just, compliance issues. So you have to judge whether your, approaches be directed toward the future or just, a compliance. You have to direct your research and development, direction based on that judgment criteria.
To protect today, but we also have to prepare for the future, which is where the technology comes back into play.
I think also there is a statement yesterday by His Excellency that we as refining, so we should not be ashamed about our business. However, we should have some sort of how to think in the future in a sustainable manner. And that's give us trigger that we should unlock our thinking to see that what's the new product portfolio, what the things that can be a commercial and how we can sustain, as mentioned also with one of my colleagues, that will be the last refining standing.
So now we're really talking about sustainability, decarbonization, thinking about a vision, thinking about what the refinery of the future will look like. Yeah, that's wonderful. Arisan, maybe a last point from you on this subject?
Comment, actually, I completely agree to the, Saudi Arabian policy crude to chemical. And why? Because, currently we use refining and chemical. This is the sector's, title. But this is not correct because hydrocarbon could be used for fuel or material. So that what we have to do is mitigate the fuel use of hydrocarbon and increase the material use so that, from now on, we would suggest that the refining and the chemical is not the right word. Fuel use or material use would be the right, wording to categorize this industry. That's my point.
Thank you so much, Arisa. Let me just go back to the audience, see if there's any further questions. If not, then I will go back to you, Fadi, okay? But we do have quite a few here. Mr. Barkan, please. He's coming.
Thank you, Andreas, and the rest of the panelists. I think you set the stage right in the beginning by talking about the reality and the actual physical implementation of the sustainability and decarbonization. There are some agendas in our industry and the world that are partially driven by futuristic outlooks, but a good portion of it is also politically driven. And I find it quite interesting to see companies like Microsoft, Intel, and companies like that claims to have net zero by 2030, while they have nothing to do with, or very little, I must say, to do with this subject in particular. And yet they expect the key players in this industry to comply with a similar emphasis on time. I guess my question to the panelists is twofold. One is, do we have clarity? How clear, if I take it from a scale from 0 to 10, how clear is the plans, the visions, the direction of the sustainability roadmap from now to the claimed dates of 2050 or 2060? And the second one is, how realistic is the dates that are set? You see many countries either targeting 2050 or 2060, and some even are talking about 2035, getting away from all fossil fuel use in the cars and so on. How realistic, if you have clarity, how realistic is the date and the possibility of achieving that date with what we know today? Thank you.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and maybe on your point, I recall the BP Energy Outlook, which was revealed or released, I think it was last week, which has 3 scenarios, as you might know, and one scenario is the base case scenario, which looks at current policies, and another scenario is the policies that would be required to achieve the targets of the Paris Climate Accord, which means that they are not aligned at present, right? So that's an interesting point to make. So maybe if we have 2 questions here, right? So one is, let's say, from a more macro perspective, policies, where do we stand, and are we on track? Are these realistic? And maybe the second question is more on a micro level. So from a refinery perspective, how clear is your pathway to net zero decarbonization? So maybe, shall we take that one first, Dr. Hassan?
I think his question is very tricky. I should be careful when I answer his question. That's number one. From the macro level, from the government point of view, yes, we believe that whenever we have been set a target by our government, we will work toward that target. As I said, that 2050 will have a net zero. But looking to the micro levels, as an ADNOC refining, we have a very clear strategy by 2030 to reduce the gas emission by 30%. And if you ask me that, what is scale of confidence? 9 out of 10. And we have a clear sort of the roadmaps in order to achieve that target. Yes, the journey is very long, but we should think about the future, about our next generations. We should not stay here and cry and put the obstacles toward the futures. And I think if we start with a clear and reliable sort of the target, definitely we'll achieve it. So from my point of view, I am so confident that 9 out of 10, I will achieve that target by 2030, inshallah.
Fadi, your perspective on more of the macro level, perhaps. Where is global policy moving? Is it going fast enough? Is it realistic? Maybe it's going too fast. How do you see that?
Well, we can see like there are a couple of frameworks, a couple of regulations, policies across the globe, and even here in the region, it's like, still on voluntary basis. We don't have carbon tax. This does not mean like we are not going to make it, or we are not going to contribute to make it happen. But what is like in place is for 2030, for example, those who followed science-based target initiatives and they put realistic goals, they will achieve that. But I think organizations and companies have their roadmaps, and this is like collectively will present the national commitment. For 2050, 2040, 2060, as I mentioned at the beginning, that technologies are not all there to support this. So I would not say we are more than 4 to 5, out of 10 to have the 2050. But it does not mean we should stop, and as Dr. mentioned, that we should stay and cry. We should work more. This is my, key message, that we need more efforts to get this happen soon. 2030, yes, I think those who follow the science-based target, yes, they can achieve this. Thank you.
I was saying, with that, maybe then as last one on this subject, Ari-san, because we're almost at the end of this panel. Please, your thoughts.
Actually, that's a big question for the government and the industry. And the government actually have a timeline, the framework. But you can judge, the difficult part of the answer is that there are two elements. One is speed of research and development. Another one is existing asset, infrastructure. You have to utilize a current, infrastructure. This is a big, investment for anyone. And from government point of view, they have timeline, but you can judge whether how much you spend for abatement cost, because abatement cannot generate any value. So how much, your government spend for the abatement? This is one judgment, to decide the timeline. But amazingly, industry side, this is a very different view, because this is the opportunity for new business, new, area of market. So Japanese government is now set up timeline and prepare for finance, traditional finance. So each company or industry now take this as an opportunity to be competitive in the next world. So that will, determine the industry's speed of research and development.
Thank you so much. Well, with that, I'm afraid we've reached the end of this panel. We've run out of time. I'm sure there's many more questions in the audience on these fascinating subjects. I want to ask first and foremost the audience to just remain seated for 1 second, because we do want to recognize our panelists for making time to be here today and share their experience and their insight with us. So let me start by doing that. Dr. Hassan, Fadi, Ari-san, thank you very much. And maybe we do a round of applause for the gentlemen.